In June 2024, a Pixar film made $1.7 billion at the box office. Not a superhero film, not a franchise sequel in the traditional sense, not a film with a villain anyone was afraid of, a film about a 13-year-old girl's anxiety. Inside Out 2 became one of the highest-grossing animated films in history, not because it was spectacular, though it was. It became one of the highest-grossing animated films in history because approximately 1 billion people watched it and thought, that is exactly what it feels like. Today we're going to look at what psychology actually sees when it watches Inside Out 2. Because underneath the extraordinary animation and the memorable new characters is something genuinely important. A psychologically precise portrait of what anxiety actually is, what it's trying to do, and why understanding it might be the most useful thing you do today. And here's the most important thing psychology has to tell you about your anxiety before we even start. It is not your enemy. The film opens with a puberty alarm going off in Riley's headquarters, and the joke lands because it's true. Adolescence is not just a social experience. It is a profound neurological one. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for impulse control, emotional regulation, rational decision-making, and the ability to think clearly about consequences, is the last part of the brain to fully develop. It doesn't reach maturity until a person's mid-20s. At the same time, the limbic system, the brain's emotional processing center, including the amygdala, is highly active during adolescence. More active, in many respects, than it will ever be again. This is not a design flaw. It is a feature. Heightened emotional sensitivity during adolescence serves important developmental functions. It makes teenagers extraordinarily attuned to social dynamics, to peer relationships, to the question of who they are and where they belong, but it also means that the emotional gas pedal is fully pressed down while the braking system is still being installed. This is what the puberty alarm in Inside Out 2 is actually depicting. Not a joke about hormones, a neurologically accurate portrait of what adolescence does to the brain's regulatory architecture. When anxiety arrives in Riley's headquarters, chaotic, well-meaning, completely overwhelming, she arrives precisely on schedule. Because adolescence is when anxiety typically intensifies for almost everyone, the brain is changing, the social stakes are rising, the identity questions are becoming urgent, and the emotional system responds accordingly. The most important psychological decision Pixar made in Inside Out 2 was this: anxiety is not the villain. She doesn't want to hurt Riley. She doesn't want to make her miserable. She is working at every moment toward what she genuinely believes is Riley's protection and success. She is just doing her job too well. Psychologists describe anxiety as a threat detection and response system. At its core, anxiety is the brain's way of scanning the environment for potential danger and preparing the body to respond. In the ancestral environment, this was extraordinarily useful. The person who felt anxious about the rustling in the grass was more likely to survive the lion than the person who didn't. The problem in the modern world is that the threat detection system cannot always distinguish between a lion in the grass and a social situation at ice hockey camp. Riley's anxiety doesn't experience the difference between physical danger and social danger as particularly significant. Both activate the same alarm system. Both feel, from the inside, like a threat to survival. Because for an adolescent whose identity and belonging are still being formed, social rejection genuinely does feel like a survival threat. The fear of not fitting in, of not being liked, of failing in front of people who matter. These are not trivial fears. They are deeply wired. What Inside Out 2 captures brilliantly is that anxiety isn't malfunctioning when she takes over Riley's headquarters. She is doing exactly what she was designed to do. She is identifying every possible threat, every way things could go wrong, every social misstep, every potential failure, and working furiously to prevent them. The issue isn't that she's broken. The issue is that she doesn't know when to stop. The most psychologically precise moment in Inside Out 2 isn't the panic attack sequence, though that's extraordinary and we'll get to it. It's the stream. Early in the film, anxiety discovers Riley's sense of self, a glowing stream of core belief statements. Beliefs formed from Riley's memories and experiences that define who she understands herself to be. Statements like, I am kind, I am funny, I am a good person. Anxiety looks at this stream and does something that psychologists will immediately recognize. She decides it's not good enough. Not the beliefs themselves, but the version of Riley those beliefs will produce. A good, kind, funny 13-year-old isn't good enough to make the Firehawks, isn't sophisticated enough to be chosen by the older kids, isn't the person Riley needs to become. So anxiety begins to suppress the existing sense of self and replace it with a new one. Psychologists who study adolescent identity formation identify this as one of the most psychologically costly things that anxiety does. It attacks the sense of self. Clinical research consistently shows that anxiety disorders in adolescence are closely linked to negative self-beliefs, specifically the belief that the current self is fundamentally inadequate, that who you are right now is not enough to get what you need from the world. Anxiety's construction of the new belief, I am not good enough, is not a random symptom. It is the central mechanism through which anxiety maintains its control. If Riley accepts that she is fundamentally not good enough, then everything anxiety does makes complete sense. Of course, you need to monitor every social interaction obsessively. Of course, you need to plan for every possible failure. Of course, you need to suppress who you actually are and perform whoever the situation seems to require. Because the self you actually have isn't adequate. The most painful part of this is how recognizable it is. Research by clinical psychologist Kristen Neff on self-compassion consistently finds that the internal voice most teenagers and adults hear when they're anxious sounds exactly like anxiety in this film. Relentless, well-meaning, convinced it's helping, and catastrophically wrong about what the self actually needs. When Riley's anxiety spirals into a full panic attack at the hockey tryout, the film depicts something that rarely gets depicted accurately in popular media. What it actually feels like from the inside. From the outside, a panic attack can look like overreaction, like drama, like someone choosing to fall apart at an inconvenient moment. From the inside, it is one of the most physically and psychologically overwhelming experiences the human nervous system can produce. The heart rate spikes, the breathing becomes shallow and rapid, the body enters full fight or flight activation, and simultaneously, confusingly, the mind begins catastrophizing, interpreting the physical symptoms of panic as evidence of something catastrophically wrong. The clinical term is a feedback loop. The anxiety produces physical symptoms. The physical symptoms are interpreted by the anxious mind as confirmation of threat, which produces more anxiety, which produces more physical symptoms, until the system is completely overwhelmed. The film shows this with extraordinary precision. Anxiety swirling chaotically around the control console. Workers sketching out worst-case scenarios at frantic speed. The system flooding with too much input too fast with no way to process it. And then, crucially, anxiety herself becoming immobilized. A tear rolling down her cheek. This detail is clinically significant. At the peak of a panic attack, the person experiencing it is not in control of their response. Anxiety is not controlling Riley at this point. Anxiety has lost control of herself. The panic has overwhelmed the very system that was trying to prevent it. Pixar consulted with psychologist Dasher Keltner and others in developing this sequence, and it shows. The portrayal of anxiety moving from protective function to overwhelming system failure to helpless stillness is the most accurate depiction of a panic attack in the history of animated film. For anyone who has experienced a panic attack and never quite been able to explain what it felt like, this scene is that explanation. One of the most psychologically important things Inside Out 2 shows is the difference between two very different approaches to difficult emotions: emotional suppression and emotional regulation. When anxiety takes over, she doesn't help Riley process her emotions. She bottles them up, pushes joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust into the back of the mind and locks them away, insisting Riley's life needs more sophisticated emotions now. This is emotional suppression, and research is very clear about what it does. Suppression works in the short term. Riley holds back her tears in front of the older kids, maintains the performance, gets through the moment. This is useful. Sometimes you genuinely need to hold it together. But suppression as a long-term strategy consistently produces worse psychological outcomes than emotional regulation. Because the emotions that get suppressed don't disappear. They accumulate. They build pressure. And when the system's capacity to suppress is exceeded, as it is during Riley's panic attack, everything comes out at once in the least controlled and most overwhelming way possible. Emotional regulation works differently. Rather than pushing emotions away, regulation involves acknowledging them, understanding what they're trying to communicate, and finding ways to respond that are proportionate and adaptive. The ending of Inside Out 2 is a masterpiece of psychological accuracy precisely because it doesn't resolve Riley's anxiety by removing it. Anxiety doesn't leave. She stays. She becomes part of Riley's emotional team. What changes is the relationship to the anxiety. Joy learns that she cannot control everything, that sadness, anxiety, and complexity are not enemies of a good life, but essential parts of one. And Riley learns something that clinical psychologists describe as one of the most important insights in emotional health: that she can be a good person and not be good enough for something. That those two things can both be true simultaneously. That the self doesn't have to be replaced. It has to be expanded. So what does the psychology of Inside Out 2 actually tell us? It tells us that Pixar made something genuinely unusual for a billion-dollar family film. They made something true. The adolescent brain is not broken. It is under construction. The emotional intensity of those years isn't weakness. It's the nervous system doing exactly what it's supposed to do during one of the most complex developmental periods in human life. Anxiety is not your enemy. It is a protection system that sometimes works too hard, covers too much ground, and mistakes social discomfort for mortal threat. The "I am not good enough" belief isn't the truth about you. It is what anxiety tells you when it has taken over the control room. And like every anxious thought, it feels completely real and completely true, and is frequently neither. Emotional regulation isn't about feeling less. It's about feeling with more skill, about letting the emotions do their jobs without letting any single emotion run the whole operation. And the sense of self, that stream of core beliefs about who you are, is not something that needs to be replaced in order to grow. It needs to be expanded, added to, given room to become more complex. Inside Out 2 made $1.7 billion because it said something that most people rarely hear clearly enough. Your anxiety is trying to save you. It's just not always right about what you need saving from. And learning to have a conversation with it, rather than either surrendering to it or fighting it, might be the most important emotional skill you ever develop. Next time on Real Psychology, we're leaving the warmth of Riley's control room and going somewhere considerably more dangerous. We're looking at Paul Atreides from Dune and the psychology of a young man who was told he was chosen, believed it, and what that belief did to everyone around him. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you there.